Hi, so I'm Eugene Yoong. I'm a developer at Configura KL, and I've been with Configura for about 2 years now. And today I'll be talking about snappers versus vessels versus components versus child snappers. And Paul Jones will be presenting the same topic on the North American side during the developer conference then. So one thing that's commonly asked is uh, when should we use vessels or components over snappers? And now with the introduction of child snappers, how does this change the scenarios where they should use them? So the goal of this talk is to kind of present a high level overview of each of these sub objects and talk about what they're good at, what they're not so good at, what they're intended for, and then maybe shed some light on your situation and help you decide on which object you should use. So first of all, we have snappers. So everyone's familiar with snappers. They're the base element of CET. They're usually what the user interacts with, right? So when we design a product for an extension, usually we'll start with a snapper, or like even if we have like a typo product, we'll start with a bunch of snappers and we'll design a hierarchy from there. So snappers have graphics, they have connectors, and in fact, like out of the objects we're talking about today, they're the only type that can have connectors. Other types can simulate connectors, but only snappers can really own them. And they also have parts. And while some of the other objects we're talking today can have parts, snappers are this parts is also supported for snappers. And usually, if you just want to design like a straightforward product, like a table or a chair, then you can just use a snapper and then just call it a day. And with some properties, and you can change some options, and that's all. If that's all you need, then you can just use one snapper and be done with that. But if you want to add some add-on products with like some child parts, and or if you want to interact with animations, even this is where the vessel and components types come into play. So next we have vessels. So vessels are small modular objects that we usually put together to construct a more complex thing. So they're very typically used in animations, and you'll use vessels to like break down an animation. Maybe use one vessel for graphics, one more vessel to interact with the snapper, or use a vessel to transfer some information between some core objects that you have in your drawing. It's a really useful way to break your animation down into more manageable pieces. And so vessels are usually owned by core objects, but they can also exist by themselves in space. So like an example of a space vessel is the monitor tool, where you can have a measure, and the measure that shows the dimensions of your snappers are being represented by space vessels. They're also typically used in animations. So let's say you have a table and you can add links to the table. You can put in space vessels. The animation can put in space vessels to represent the position. You can add the links at. Also, like I mentioned, they're owned by core objects, so they're designed to be easily transferable between core objects. So you can pass a vessel from one owner to another. And this is really useful for when you're writing animations. So when you have some animations and you want to customize the behavior, you don't have to think about all the edge cases. You can just have your snapper pass a vessel to the animation and customize the behavior that way. So like an example of this is if you look at the chain dimensions, there's an option to remove segments. So the chain dimension will pass in a remover vessel, and then it will allow it will override the behavior of the remover animation to allow the user to remove certain ticks of the chain instead of removing the entire chain like it normally would for a normal snapper. However, vessels have no support for parts and connectors. So if you want to use it as a subproduct, it might not be so well suited, right? And also, they're not saved. So by default, the vessels are stream null. So vessels are more designed to be transient, and they are not really used for representation, more for communication. They were designed with a collaborative mentality in mind. So to sum up, vessels are very well suited for writing animations due to its nature of passing information between each other, and also like how dynamic you can change owners. So it's pretty useful for providing like a way of doing animations dynamically. Also, if you have like a very specific vessel, you can just reuse the vessel in your animation, and you can reduce a lot of code. Instead of having to write the same functionality over and over again, you can just pass in the vessel to the animation. However, like I said, unless you put in some extra effort, you don't really have parts, and they're not really saved. So if you need something, if you need a way to persistently represent your subproduct or add-on, maybe components are the better way to do that. So components are usually part of a snapper, and you can have a bunch of components in your snapper, and it might be a good way to compartmentalize subproducts of your snapper. You can have parts, so you can represent all the subparts of your product. So can also have its own properties. So you can actually select a component and change the properties of the component. So like an example of this is maybe you have a sink and then you use a faucet as a component, and then you can change the properties of the faucet, like such as like the material or the type of faucet. So we'll have like graphics and its own parts, but it cannot exist on its own in space. You can't put a component in without an owner. So and it also cannot have connectors. So if you need to like stretch or snap to a component, you can't really do that. So usually that's the dividing line of when you want to use a component versus like a snapper. So why components? So like Jonas mentioned earlier, they have a smaller, they're not as heavy as snappers. So maybe you just want something simple. You just want a way to show some graphics, and you just want a way to recognize some parts and then change the pricing based on the materials that are selected. Then components might be the way to go. Since they don't have that many methods, you have a more focused interface, and they have a smaller structure. And also, while this might it's not out of the box, but like if you have take some effort, maybe you can cache your components, and then you can share your components between different snappers. However, components are very rigid, so they out of the box, they don't have support for snapping or dragging or removal. So if you want to have more flexibility with your components, you're going to have to implement your own animations to do these things. So if you want more flexibility, then we have the newly introduced child snappers. So child snappers are just snappers that have a parent. So you can take any snapper, and then using a relationship, you can define a parent-child relationship between the snappers. And because it's just a snapper, any type of snapper can be made into a child snapper. So the benefit of this is you can just reuse whatever snappers you have. So like I mentioned just earlier, you have a sink and a faucet. So if you want to bundle the sink with a cabinet, you can just use a child snapper relation, and you don't have to create a new snapper called sink with faucet, right? So you can that gives you like the flexibility to like bundle existing snappers together without adding like too much additional code. And also, like I mentioned, snappers can own connectors. So if you need to like drag, or like if you need to stretch or snap something to your subproduct, then child snappers would be a better way to represent your subproduct. So snappers as a base element of CET have a lot of support. You have all these animations that you can use to interact with them, and unlike components, right? Like so you can change materials on them easily without having to write a lot of extra code, and a lot of the functionality that already exists for snappers, because well, I mean, they're such a fundamental element, right? However, I mean, this is just splitting hairs, right? Like it's might not really be a downside. So it's a bit more heavyweight. Maybe you have to take more care in implementing a subproduct when you use a child snapper. So maybe you just want something very simple, very quick. You just want graphics and some properties. Then a component might be better. And also, child snappers can't be cached and shared amongst other snappers. You have to instantiate new snappers to go along with them. So just like to sum up about all the objects we talked about, right? So when you're talking about vessels, we're talking about probably about animations. You want a way to communicate like some information between different core objects, and you want to be able to like define your animations dynamically, then probably vessels are the way to go. However, if you want a subproduct, so the first thing to consider is using a child snapper. So since the relationship is very configurable, you can choose whether or not you select it. Like the user might not even know he's interacting with a different snapper entirely. The flexibility that child snappers can give you might be a good future proof for your implementation, so that you don't have to redefine like something else if you want to change your behavior. So child snappers are really flexible, and they might be a good way to guard against redundancy. And then components, maybe if you just want something very simple like tiles on a panel, right? You just want to change the material of each of the individual tiles. You select them and change some of the properties. But then if you want to stretch them, then maybe child snappers are the better way to go, right? So actually, in the developer extension, I do have a panel that is made just with components, and Yona showed up the panel earlier with made with child snappers, so you can probably take a look and compare them. So that's all I have to say. I hope the talk shed some light on at least like the high level overview and what situations they're useful at.